Chapter 17 The Legend of St. Alban. The legend of the craft now proceeds to narrate the history of the introduction of Masonry into England in the time of St. Alban, who lived in the 3rd century. The legend referring to the proto-martyr of England is not mentioned in the Hallowelboom, but is first found in the Cook manuscript in the following words. And soon after that come St. Adhabel into England, and he converted St. Alban to Christendom. And St. Alban loved well Masons, and he gave them first their charges and manners first in England. And he ordained covenant to pay for their travel. Footnote. Cook translates this convenient times, supplying the second word, but a more correct word is suitable or proper, which is an old meaning of convenient. He ordained suitable pay for their labor, and this agrees with the later manuscripts, which impress the fact that St. Alban made their pay right good. Second footnote. Cook manuscript, lines 602 to 611. The later manuscripts say nothing of St. Adhabel, and it is not until we get to the Kraus manuscript in the beginning of the 18th century that we find any mention of St. Amphibolus, who is described in that document as having been the teacher of St. Alban. But St. Amphibolus, of which the Adhabel of the Cook manuscript is undoubtedly a corruption, is so apocryphal a personage that I am rejoiced that the later legendists have not thought proper to follow the Cook document and give him a place in the legend. In fact, Amphibolum was the ecclesiastical name of a cloak worn by priests of the Romish Church over their other vestments. Footnote. It is significant that among the spurious relics sent, when fearing the Danish invasion in the reign of Edward the Confessor, by the abbot of St. Albans, to the monks of Ely, was a very rough, shagged old coat, which it was said had been usually worn by St. Amphibolus. It was a vestment ecclesiastically transmuted into a saint, as the handkerchief on which Christ left the image of his face when, as it is said, it was handed to him on his way to Calvary by a pious Jewess, became, from the Greco-Latin vera icon, the true image, converted into Saint Veronica. The Masonic are not the only legendists who draw deeply on our credulity. Of St. Alban, ecclesiastical history furnishes only the following meager details, and even of these, some are apocryphal, or at least lack the stamp of authenticity. He was born, so runs the tradition, in the 3rd century in Hertfordshire, England, near the town of Verulamium. Going to Rome, he served for 7 years as a soldier under the Emperor Diocletian. He then returned with a companion and preceptor Amphibolus to Britain, and betook himself to Verulamium. When The persecutions of the Christians commenced in Britain. Amphibolus was sought for as one who had apostatized to the new religion, but as he could not be found, St. Alban voluntarily presented himself to the judge, and after undergoing torture was imprisoned. Soon after this, the retreat of Amphibolus having been discovered, both he and St. Alban suffered death for being Christians. 4 centuries after his martyrdom, Offa, king of the Mercians, erected a monastery at Holmhurst, the hill where he was buried, and soon after the town of St. Albans arose in its vicinity. When the Christian religion became predominant in England, the Church paid great honors to the memory of the proto-martyr. A chapel was erected over his grave, which, according to the Venerable Bede, was of admirable workmanship. The Masonic legend contains details which are not furnished by the religious one. According to it, St. Alban was the steward of the household of Carausius, he who had revolted from the Emperor Maximilian and usurped the sovereignty of England. Carausius employed him in building the town walls. St. Alban, thus receiving the superintendence of the craft, treated them with great kindness, increased their pay, and gave them a charter to hold a general assembly. He assisted them in making masons and framed for them a constitution, for such is the meaning of the phrase, gave them charges. Now there is sufficient historical evidence to show that architecture was introduced into England by the Roman artificers who followed, as was their usage, the Roman legions, habilitated themselves in the conquered colonies, and engaged in the construction not only of camps and fortifications, but also, when peace was restored, in the building of temples and even private edifices. Architectural ruins and Latin inscriptions, which still remain in many parts of Britain, attest to the labors and the skill of these Roman artists, and sustain the statement of the legend that Masonry, which, it must be remembered, is, in the old records, only a synonym of architecture, was introduced into England during the period of its Roman colonization.